"I'm selling my toys so my mom can live," the boy said. He didn't know the man who stopped was a billionaire CEO, and that his life was about to change forever. The wind blew harder than it had yesterday and colder than it should have for early spring, but the boy did not seem to notice. He stood still on the corner of West 47th Street, gripping the edge of a cardboard box with fingers that had long since gone numb. His shoulders were hunched not from weakness but from endurance, and his thin denim overalls did little to protect him from the biting chill that moved through the buildings like a silent storm. His name was Lucas Miller, and he was 8 years old. His shoes were worn and the laces were mismatched. His cheeks were flushed from the cold and his hair had the messy golden look of someone who had gotten himself ready that morning while his mother was too sick to rise from the couch. The box in front of him was not large, but it was packed to its corners with treasures that had once been loved. A stuffed rabbit with one ear sewn back on with blue thread. A red fire truck missing one wheel. A Rubik's Cube with the stickers faded on one side. 2 comic books so folded they barely held their shape. Each toy had a story. Each toy had once been part of something joyful. Now they sat in silence waiting to be bought by strangers who did not know the story behind them. On the front of the box in big bold letters written with a marker that bled too much ink were the words, "I am selling my toys so my mom can live." People walked past. Some glanced. Most looked away. A man in a business coat slowed but then kept walking when his phone rang. A woman in gym clothes threw a pitying glance over her shoulder but did not stop. No one did. Lucas did not ask for anything. He just stood beside the box like a guard protecting memories too precious to be left alone. His mother Sophia was at home in their apartment 3 blocks away. She had been getting worse for weeks but refused to return to the hospital. The medication they needed cost more than she made in a month back when she could still work, and now there was nothing left. Rent was late again. The fridge held little but a bottle of milk and some rice. Lucas had watched her sleep too long. He had seen her try to smile while hiding how hard it was to breathe. He had seen the bottle of pills tip over and spill the last of them onto the carpet. He had tried everything he could think of. But today he had woken early and pulled the toys from under the bed. He had found the box in the alley behind their building and wiped it clean with a damp cloth. He had written the message himself sitting on the floor next to his mother who did not wake. The box was heavier than he expected, but he dragged it 1 block at a time until he reached the busy corner. He had chosen it because of the people. The constant flow of coats and briefcases and hands that might pause. The morning had passed slowly. A few children had looked at the toys but their parents always tugged them away. A teenager took a photo and smiled like it was a joke. No one bought anything. Lucas was cold. His stomach ached from not eating. His fingers were red and stiff, but he refused to leave. Because what if someone stopped after he walked away? What if the one person who could help never saw the sign? So he stayed. Breathing in the exhaust from buses. Listening to the scratch of his own boots on the sidewalk. Watching the sky for some sign that today would be different. And then a car slowed. Not a taxi or a delivery truck, but a black Bentley with windows tinted so dark he could not see inside. It did not honk or pull away. It paused. The driver's seat window rolled down slowly and from behind it a man looked out. Not rushed. Not impatient. He was older than Lucas expected, maybe mid-30s, with brown eyes that looked serious and a coat that probably cost more than everything in their apartment. He stared at the box. Then at Lucas. Then the door opened. And the man stepped out. His shoes were clean, his suit was pressed, and his presence felt like something that did not belong on a sidewalk like this. He walked over. Not quickly, not cautiously. Just calmly. Lucas looked up. The man crouched beside the box and for a moment said nothing. Then finally with a quiet voice he asked, "Did you write this?" Lucas nodded. "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because my mom is sick and I need to help her." The man stared at him for another moment, then looked into the box. He did not laugh. He did not frown. He simply sat back on his heels and asked, "Can I hear the rest of the story?" Lucas blinked. Then nodded. And as people passed and traffic hummed and the city kept moving, one man stayed. And listened. The man did not interrupt as Lucas began to speak. He did not rush him or push for details. He only listened, his expression steady, his gaze focused, not in the way adults sometimes look at children with half-interest or polite indulgence, but like someone who genuinely wanted to hear everything the boy had to say. Lucas told him about his mom, about how she used to work at a school and come home smelling like chalk and cinnamon tea, how she loved reading poems out loud even to him when he was little, how she got sick slowly then suddenly, how she stopped going to work and started sleeping too much, how the kitchen became quieter, how the fridge began to echo, how she would smile and say it's fine even when her hands shook, how he would pretend to believe her even though he didn't. The man did not flinch at the sadness in the boy's voice. He nodded softly once as if he understood far more than he let on. Lucas said, "I don't know what the medicine is called, but she keeps a list on the fridge. And the pills are almost gone. She tries to pretend, but I see it, and this was all I had left." The man looked into the box again slowly, as if the small forgotten toys were made of something sacred. He picked up the rabbit, turned it over gently like it was glass, and then set it back down. Lucas watched him closely, trying to guess what kind of person this was. No one had ever stopped this long, no one had ever asked for the full story. Finally the man stood and offered his hand. "My name is Nathan Carter," he said. "And you are Lucas Miller, sir?" Nathan smiled. "Not sir, just Nathan." He reached into the inside of his coat and pulled out a leather wallet, not flashy, just well-worn. Like everything he owned was both expensive and understated. He took out 5 folded bills, handed them to Lucas and said, "I'd like to buy all of them, every single one," but instead of taking the box he knelt again and said, "Can I walk you home?" Lucas hesitated, then nodded. He gathered the box into his arms and began walking. Nathan took the edge to help carry the weight even though it was light compared to anything he was used to lifting on the walk. Nathan asked only one question, "Do you live with anyone else?" Lucas said, "No, just us. It's always been us. My dad left when I was a baby. Mom said she wanted me to grow up loved, not disappointed," and that was all he needed to know. When they reached the building, Nathan looked up at the cracked brick and peeling numbers on the entryway, then followed Lucas inside. The halls smelled like wet paint and something old, the kind of place no one visited by choice, just by necessity. Lucas led him up 3 floors and opened the door without a key. It stuck a little from the damp, and inside it was dark, not from lack of light but from silence. It was quiet, like the apartment was trying to hold its breath, waiting for something to happen. Nathan stepped inside and saw her, Sophia. She was on the couch, thin, pale, too tired to pretend anymore. Her head turned slowly and her eyes widened when she saw a tall stranger in a coat standing behind her. "Son, Lucas, what is this? Who is that?" Her voice was hoarse, like she had not used it much in recent days. Lucas closed the door and whispered softly, "It's okay, he helped me. This is Nathan." Nathan gave a small nod, his voice gentle. "I am not here to hurt anyone, I just want to help." Sophia tried to sit up, her face flushed with both effort and confusion. "I don't understand." Nathan held up a hand. "May I explain?" She hesitated, then nodded. He sat in the chair across from her and listened again as she recounted the last few months, her symptoms, the prescriptions, the insurance denials, the phone calls unanswered, the clinic waitlists, the bills unopened, the moments when she closed her eyes and wondered if she would ever open them again. When she stopped, he did not give pity, he did not shake his head or offer empty phrases. He only asked what she needed most right now. She looked at him, then at Lucas, who had fallen asleep against the side of the couch clutching the now empty toy box, and she whispered, "I need time, I need breath, and I need someone who sees us." Nathan stood and said, "Then let's start there." He handed her a business card, nothing fancy, just his name, a phone number, and the embossed logo of a company she vaguely remembered from news articles, Hale Consolidated. She looked up slowly and stared at him, this time fully seeing not just the man but the man behind the suit, and then it hit her. "You are that Nathan Carter, the CEO, the boardroom billionaire, the face on every finance magazine." And he only smiled and said, "Right now I am just someone who stopped because I couldn't keep walking." Sophia said nothing more, just held the card like it might disappear in her hand. And in the next room Lucas slept, and the wind outside softened, like maybe the city itself was ready to listen too. The apartment was still quiet long after Nathan left, but the air felt different, not lighter exactly but stirred, like a window had been cracked open after being shut too long. Sophia sat for nearly 20 minutes without moving, the business card still resting on her lap, its corners digging slightly into the thin fabric of her pajama pants. She stared at it not because she needed to read it again but because holding it meant the moment had really happened. A man had walked into her life from another world, not to judge, not to fix and not to save, but simply to see, to stay. The thought alone felt more dangerous than comforting. She had spent months building walls to keep herself upright, pushing through days with borrowed strength, nights with barely enough breath to sleep, and now this man had stood in her living room and said the words she had not allowed herself to think. You do not have to do this alone. She looked over at Lucas, still curled on the couch, the box of toys now empty beside him, his small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Her heart ached with both pride and guilt. He had tried to sell the only things he had left because she could no longer provide, because she had been so deep in survival that she had not seen how close he was to breaking. She wiped her eyes quietly and stood. Even that small motion felt heavy. She moved to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, took stock: 2 eggs, a half-empty bottle of orange juice, and a container of something she was too afraid to open. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow we figure it out. But the thought did not carry the same sharp fear it had the day before, because someone knew now. Someone had seen her in all her frailty, and instead of turning away he had leaned in. The next morning she woke early, a dull ache resting in her bones, but something beneath it humming, a kind of restless energy she had not felt in months. She moved slowly, making coffee from the last of the grounds and warming water for Lucas' oatmeal. When he wandered in, still half asleep, he blinked at the table, then looked at her. Is he coming back? Sophia paused, then said, I don't know, baby. He said he would. Lucas nodded as if that was enough. After breakfast she picked up the phone, stared at it for several minutes, then called the number on the card. It rang once, then again, then clicked, and for a second her breath caught and she considered hanging up, but then his voice came through. Warm, low, familiar. Sophia, she exhaled. Yes, it's me. Is this a bad time? Never. For you. How are you? She sat back in the chair, unsure how to answer. Honestly, better than yesterday. Not quite good, but awake, and that means something. I want to help, Nathan said, and not with just money. If you let me, I can bring in someone to evaluate your treatment, and I know a doctor who might be able to speed up the process at St. Margaret's. They owe me a few favors. She hesitated. Too many years of pride wrapped around her like armor, but something in his voice made it possible to say, okay, thank you. Within 48 hours the apartment saw more visitors than it had in a year. A home nurse came in and quietly took vitals. A nutritionist dropped off a revised meal plan complete with groceries delivered to the door by a man who refused a tip and only said, Mr. Carter sends his regards. Sophia watched all of this unfold like she was outside her own life, and through it all Nathan checked in. He never intruded, he never gave orders. He just appeared when she needed him, sometimes only by text, sometimes with a knock and a smile and a thermos of real coffee. One afternoon, as she sat bundled in a blanket watching Lucas draw spaceships on the floor, she asked him, how do you know when someone is actually helping and not just trying to feel good about themselves? Nathan looked up from the notebook where he had been making calls. You know, when they don't leave after the hard part starts. She met his eyes, and something in her expression softened. Do you always stay this long? He shook his head. Never before, and still he stayed. And the days began to string together, not with miracles or dramatic changes, but with steadiness, with breath, with warmth, with laughter that returned to Lucas like sunlight through cracks in closed blinds. And Sophia no longer flinched every time the doorbell rang, because now sometimes it meant soup or books or flowers or nothing at all, just Nathan and his presence and the quiet but undeniable fact that he was choosing to be there, not out of guilt, not out of obligation, but out of something that looked very much like care. And when the doctor from St. Margaret's called and said that her name had been moved up on the list and that her first round of advanced treatment could begin in 2 weeks, Sophia cried, not from fear but from the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, this chapter was not the end but a beginning. The days began to blur into a rhythm that Sophia had almost forgotten how to live, not just surviving but actually existing in time with someone else. Mornings began with soft footsteps from Lucas in his pajamas, dragging his blanket behind him like a tail. Afternoons were quieter, no longer filled with the hum of worry or the rattle of overdue bills, but instead with the rustle of paper, the scent of soup warming on the stove, and the occasional knock on the door that meant Nathan was standing there again, holding something simple, a bag of groceries, a new book for Lucas, a second-hand sweater in her size that he said just looked like her. And evenings were where the silence used to settle like a weight, but now they stretched with the sound of pages turning, laughter that felt too loud and beautiful in their small kitchen, and the way his eyes would sometimes linger just a little too long on her face when she smiled. But neither of them said anything, not yet, because what they were building was too quiet to name and too fragile to rush. Sophia found herself waiting for the sound of his voice on the phone, for the shuffle of his coat in the hallway. She scolded herself for it more than once, told herself to stay grounded, told herself he was a man from another life, a man who made decisions in rooms lined with glass and polished wood while she was still measuring the price of aspirin at the pharmacy. But it didn't change the way her chest eased when he entered a room, or the way Lucas had begun setting a third place at the table without Asking it was a Wednesday afternoon when Nathan arrived early carrying takeout from a little Italian place in the West Village she had mentioned once without realizing it was her favorite. She opened the door in a sweatshirt and socks, hair pulled into a loose knot, and he looked at her like she was something worth remembering. You remembered, she said, surprised. Of course, he replied as if it had never been a question. They sat on the floor in the living room, plates balanced between them. Lucas curled in the corner building a model spaceship, and for the first time in what felt like years Sophia laughed, not the soft careful laugh she had practiced with strangers but the real kind, the kind that shook her shoulders and brought tears to her eyes. And Nathan sat back watching her like someone who was witnessing spring after a long winter. Later, when Lucas had gone to bed and the apartment fell into that warm evening hush that only comes after a full day, she handed Nathan a mug of tea and said softly, "Do you ever get tired of all the pretending?" "What do you mean?" he asked. "I mean the suits, the titles, the meetings. Do you ever just want to be someone else, someone not expected to have all the answers?" He looked down at the mug, then back at her. "Every single day. And here, do you feel like that, someone else sometimes with you?" "Yes." She held his gaze longer than she meant to, and something in the room shifted, not loud, not sudden, but real. They both felt it in the silence that followed, in the way her hand brushed against his when she took his empty cup and did not pull away quickly, in the way he stood and reached for his coat more slowly than usual, as if waiting to see if she would ask him to stay. And for a second, just a second, she almost did, but the words caught somewhere between her throat and her heart, so instead she walked him to the door and said, "Thank you for the food, thank you for everything." He nodded, then paused before leaving, turned back and said, "You do know, right, that I would stay if you asked me?" And she smiled, tired and raw, and answered, "I know." And then he was gone, and she stood in the doorway staring at the quiet hallway, wondering when she had last felt this full and this terrified at the same time, because what they were building now was no longer just support or kindness, it was something harder, more dangerous. It was hope, and hope had teeth and memory and the power to break. But she did not turn away. She closed the door, leaned against it, and let herself feel it all, the fear, the want, the unspoken truth that sometimes healing comes in the shape of a person who simply refuses to leave. Lucas began to notice things before either of them said them out loud. He noticed how Nathan's coat started to hang on the same hook by the door every time he visited, how there was now always an extra glass already out on the table before dinner, how the old creaky chair that used to collect laundry was suddenly kept clear as if waiting for someone to sit in it. Regularly he noticed how his mother looked up when she heard Nathan's voice, not startled, not guarded, just softer, like she was already used to the sound, like it belonged. He noticed that Nathan always remembered how he liked his sandwiches cut diagonally, not in squares, and how he never told him to grow up or be brave when he got scared, but instead just sat next to him and waited until the fear passed. One evening Lucas was drawing quietly in the corner while Nathan and Sophia spoke in low voices in the kitchen, the kind of quiet that was not about secrets but about being close and comfortable and not needing to be loud. He was sketching a picture of a house, not their actual apartment, but a house like the kind he saw in books, with windows and a yard and a small tree out front. He drew himself in the window and his mom at the door and Nathan on the steps. He did not show it to them, not yet. He folded it and tucked it under his pillow. Later he would, but not tonight. That same night Sophia stood at the sink rinsing plates while Nathan dried them beside her, their hands brushing every so often and neither of them pulling back. He glanced at her and said quietly, "I have a retreat coming up, 3 days upstate. It's with the board, some investors too. I won't be in the city." And something about the way he said it was hesitant, like he was unsure if it was okay to leave, unsure if she would be alright, unsure if she would still want him there when he returned. She kept rinsing the plate a little slower than usual and then said, "I used to hate silence when he was gone. I was always afraid of what it meant, but lately." She paused, handed him the dish and met his eyes. "Lately I think silence is only hard when you're alone." And Nathan looked at her not with sympathy but with something deeper, something more grounding, like he had found a place to rest in her too. After he left that night she could not sleep, not because of worry, but because of the feeling that everything was changing, not just her health, not just her routine, but her sense of what the future could look like. It no longer ended at the next doctor appointment or the next refill or the next good day. Now the road stretched out farther, and on that road she saw Lucas with books in his backpack and scraped knees, and Nathan beside her, not as a guest, not as someone who dropped in, but as someone who had chosen them over and over and still would. In the morning, when she woke, the sun was already up and the smell of coffee was in the air. She walked into the kitchen and found Nathan there early. "Back already? No retreat," he said simply. "Postponed." She raised an eyebrow. "Investors can wait, some things can't," he replied. Her heart did a strange uneven thing and she nodded, said nothing more because she knew what it meant. He had chosen to stay again. And later that week, when they all sat together on the floor watching a movie with popcorn in a chipped bowl and Lucas curled up between them, His head resting on Nathan's shoulder. Sophia looked over and saw Nathan already looking back, and she said softly, "You know you don't have to prove anything," and he replied just as softly, "I am not proving, I am just living, and maybe this is what it is meant to feel like, not the drama, not the declarations, just this warmth, stillness, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next they would face it not as three people caught in a moment but as something new, something whole, something that felt a lot like family." The quiet they had come to know did not break all at once. It frayed slowly at the edges the way fabric begins to wear thin at points of pressure. First it came in the form of an email to Nathan marked urgent from his executive assistant. It mentioned press interest, rumor, speculation, and the phrase potential narrative risk. He stared at it for a long time, his coffee going cold unread beside him. He did not respond, not that day. Not yet. Instead he set the phone down and looked out the window at the apartment across the street, at the blinking yellow light in the corner store below, at the shadow of a little boy he knew was Lucas racing past with a paper airplane in his hand, and he stayed there watching because he knew once he walked back into his world the version of himself they were all used to might never be able to return the same way. Later that afternoon he arrived at Sophia's door carrying dinner and a smile, but his eyes were tired, and she noticed, she always noticed. She said nothing at first, instead letting him set the table, listening to Lucas chatter about his school project, watching Nathan take it all in with that quiet steadiness that had come to mean something permanent, something safe. When Lucas had gone to bed and the apartment was still, Sophia asked him what's going on, and for a moment he looked like he was trying to find a way to soften it, then chose not to. "There are people asking questions," he said. "They want to know where I am spending my time, who I am seen with." "I haven't responded yet." She nodded slowly, not surprised, only saddened. "Are we a liability?" she asked, and he shook his head quickly. "No, no, never." "It's not that. Then what is it?" "It's the world I come from," he said. "It never learned how to make space for people who choose something else, something quieter, something real." She leaned back, arms crossed around herself like armor. "Then maybe it's time to teach it," she said, and he smiled, but there was something behind it, something wary. The next day the article was published, a short piece tucked into the business section, nothing scandalous, just a headline about a billionaire seen repeatedly at the same Lower East Side apartment, rumors of personal involvement, and a photo taken from too far away to show much but enough to hint, enough to invite more. Sophia read it while waiting for Lucas at school, her chest tightening with each word, not because it was cruel but because it was real, because it was a spotlight she had not invited and never wanted. She deleted it quickly and told herself it didn't matter, but that night when she opened the door to find Nathan standing there without his usual ease, she knew it did. He walked in slowly, sat down, took her hand and said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly." She nodded. "Do you want me here, not just when no one is looking, not just when it's safe? Do you want me to be part of this fully?" She looked at him, saw the weight of the choice, the way he was offering everything without asking anything, and she said yes, more than anything. Then he said, "Then let's stop hiding. I want people to know who you are, who Lucas is, what you mean to me." And she felt her heart catch, not from fear but from the way truth always does when it arrives unannounced. Then she whispered, "Then do it, but please understand, I never wanted to be a symbol, I just wanted to be seen." He squeezed her hand softly and said, "You were seen long before anyone else noticed." The next morning he walked into his office with a decision made, not with armor but with clarity. When the board raised questions he answered them. When reporters called he made a statement, not polished, not rehearsed, just this: "I found something worth protecting, something that matters more than perception, and I will not apologize for choosing it." And at home Sophia stood at the kitchen window watching Lucas ride in uneven circles on his scooter, and she felt the wind shift, the air clear, and the future widen in front of her like a road finally free of fog. And even though they knew more questions would come, even though they knew some days would test everything they were building, they also knew they were no longer pretending, they were living, and they were doing it together. The days that followed were filled with small quiet changes, not the kind that made headlines or stirred attention, but the kind that settled deeply into a life and rewrote how it felt to move through each hour. It started with the morning. Sophia no longer woke alone to an empty kitchen. Now there were two mugs on the counter, one with a faint lipstick mark and one with strong black coffee, just how Nathan liked it. Sometimes he arrived early enough to make breakfast standing barefoot in their kitchen, still in rolled shirt sleeves, smiling softly as Lucas ran in asking if he could help with the eggs, and always being given something to stir. The three of them had developed a rhythm, not choreographed, not planned, but natural, like music they had been playing for years. Sophia began to laugh more easily. She stopped checking the clock in the afternoon and started reading again, sometimes aloud to Lucas, sometimes to herself. Nathan would come in from a call and find her curled in the armchair with her hair undone, a blanket tucked over her legs, and he would pause just long enough to remember that he had once believed his life was full before he met her, but now it felt Like it had only begun. Lucas changed too. He became louder in the way happy children do. He sang while brushing his teeth. He talked to his drawings. He asked questions about everything, especially about family. One evening after dinner, as they were putting dishes away, he looked at Sophia and said in that small serious voice children use when trying to be grown up, "Is Nathan staying forever?" She almost dropped the plate in her hand and glanced at Nathan, who was behind Lucas drying his hands. He froze, then crouched beside him and asked gently, "Would you want me to?" And Lucas nodded, his whole face hopeful and bright and full of unspoken yes. And Nathan said, "Then I will if your mom wants me to too." Sophia watched them and felt something deep inside her shift, not because she was surprised but because she realized it had already happened long ago. Somewhere between the nights Nathan stayed late just to talk. In the mornings he left notes in the margin of the book she was reading. She had let him in fully and it had not broken her, it had made her whole again. A few days later they took a walk in the park, not a big outing, just a stretch of green and trees and a small quiet pond that reflected the sky back at them. Lucas raced ahead chasing pigeons with a stick and laughing so hard he fell twice but got up grinning every time. Nathan and Sophia walked slower side by side, her arm looped through his like it had always belonged there. They talked about nothing and everything. He told her about his childhood, the parts he never shared with the press, about how his father had loved numbers more than people and how for years he thought that was the only way to survive. And she told him about the first book she ever fell in love with, about how she used to dream of opening a tiny bookstore with a tea counter in the back. And when she said it he looked at her seriously and said, "We could still do that." And she laughed, not because it was silly but because it was suddenly possible. When they got home Lucas had drawn a picture on the fridge, 3 stick figures holding hands, a house with smoke coming out of the chimney, a sun in the corner with a smiley face, and underneath in blocky letters, "Our home." Nathan looked at it for a long time, then said softly, "Do you remember the first time I saw you? You were standing beside a box in the wind like you were holding the world together with your hands, and I remember thinking I could not walk past because something in you looked like truth. And now I look around and I see this and I realize I did not walk into your life to save you, I walked in so you could save me too." Sophia stepped closer, took his hand and said, "I think we both just stopped being alone." And neither of them needed to say anything more that night when they sat on the couch, Lucas sleeping across both of their laps, the windows open to the sound of distant city life. They did not talk about the future or the past, they just breathed and existed and held on to the simple beautiful truth that sometimes family is not what you are born into, it is what you build together. One promise, one quiet day at a time. The morning was warm, the kind of warmth that came not from temperature but from a room filled with light and stillness and the soft hum of something new and right. It was a Saturday and there were no alarms, no appointments, no rush. Sophia woke to the sound of Lucas humming in the kitchen, followed by the clink of plates and Nathan whispering, "Careful buddy, we don't want to break those." She smiled without opening her eyes and listened, not because she was trying to eavesdrop but because it had become her favorite sound, the sound of not being alone. She sat up slowly, her body still recovering but stronger now, steadier. She made her way to the kitchen and found the two of them standing over a stack of pancakes, one slightly burned. Lucas was proudly pouring syrup like it was treasure and Nathan was pretending not to notice the sticky puddle forming around the edges. They looked up as she entered, both grinning, both home. She kissed Lucas on the head and touched Nathan's arm gently as she passed her fingers, staying a little longer than necessary. Later that day they took a walk, not because they had to but because it felt right. The air was crisp, the sky open, the sidewalks filled with strangers who did not know them and did not need to, because what they carried between them was not for show, it was just theirs. They walked past the corner where it all began, where Lucas had once stood in the wind beside a cardboard box holding everything he owned and everything he feared. Sophia paused. Nathan too. Lucas tilted his head confused and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Sophia said, "just remembering how far we came from here." Nathan took her hand and said, "And how far we still get to go in the evening after dinner and laughter and a movie." None of them finished. They sat together on the couch, the 3 of them pressed close. Lucas fell asleep, his head on Sophia's lap, one arm draped across Nathan's side like he already knew this was where he belonged. Sophia looked down at him and then at Nathan, who met her eyes and said, "I never thought I would have this, not with my name, not with the life I built. I thought I had chosen power over peace, but now I know I was just waiting for the right reason to stop running." And she said quietly, "I never thought anyone would stay, not because they had to but because they wanted to." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. It was not a ring or a box or anything grand, just a folded piece of paper, and when he opened it, it was a printout of a property listing, small house near the city, old bookstore space on the ground floor, upstairs rooms, a little garden. He placed it in her hand and said, "I know this is sudden and I know we still have a lot to figure out, but I wanted you to know I See a future with you, not in theory, not someday, but now. If you are ready. Sophia looked down at the paper, then back at him, her eyes full and her voice steady. I am ready, but only if we make it together, all of it, the work, the healing, the dreaming. And Nathan said always, and Lucas shifted in his sleep, murmuring something about pancakes and comets, and the three of them laughed softly without waking him. The next morning they woke slowly, unhurried, surrounded by sunlight and quiet and the unmistakable presence of belonging. They made breakfast again, this time together, less mess, more love. And when they sat down to eat, Sophia looked around the room, the same small apartment, but it no longer felt temporary, it felt chosen. And she realized that home was not the walls or the table or the address. Home was the people who stayed, who chose each other over and over, in silence and in storm, in sickness and in light. And so when Lucas raised his glass of orange juice and said to family, both of them raised theirs too, not just because they were echoing him, but because they meant it, and because in that moment there was nothing more true than the fact that they were no longer waiting for life to begin, they were living it fully, finally, and together. I didn't want to end this story with a wedding, a windfall, or a fairy tale finish. Because this was never a story about perfection. It was a story about presence. At the heart of it is a boy who stood in the cold with nothing but his toys and the love for his mother. A woman who refused to be broken even when everything inside her was falling apart. And a man who had everything, except connection, until one handwritten sign stopped his world. This is a story about kindness that isn't flashy. About showing up even when it's inconvenient. About healing, not through miracles, but through choice, every day, quiet and real. Grayson didn't swoop in to save. He learned how to stay. Emily didn't need rescuing. She needed someone who saw her strength and chose to stand beside it. And Ethan, the boy who gave everything he had, reminded us that love doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. If you finish this story feeling something soft settle in your chest, that's the ending I hoped for. Not happily ever after, but honestly ever after. Because sometimes, the greatest kind of love is the one that just doesn't walk away.